We were what shaping hands had made us over the centuries, moulding our minds, casting and recasting our culture. And often those hands extended from the lace sleeves of a priestly surplice. We had drawn succor and strength from a mother figure who saw us as hers, distinct from those of the alien master and culture. That alien flag had now been thrown off. Now we were free to proclaim the mother figure which had helped sustain us, which had embraced the mass of the people, the mass which now held the power. Now they would sing out that identity and character, and in a remarkable public display would sing out of faith, fatherland, and of Mother Church. Catholic Ireland was to proclaim itself. That came in the Eucharistic Congress of 1932, commemorating the roots of Irish Catholicism, the symbols of which were intertwined with a view of Irishness. Those roots had been put down 1,500 years beforehand with the arrival of St. Patrick, sparking the light of Christianity here with the Paschal fire on the hill of Slane, explaining a mystery of faith with the shamrock which would ever after symbolize things Irish. The June air held a heady mixture of nationalism and religion, with emotion running from every pore of the nation. In their hundreds of thousands, they left the hills of Kerry and Donegal, making their way on foot or by cart to the nearest bus or train for the day-long rolling journey to the capital. They thronged the streets of Dublin, winding past open-air altars in columns of flickering light, hands cupped around candles. Over 1 million sang out of their own Holy Queen. Every hotel and guest house was crammed, the overflow billeted in new special buildings until they too overflowed. So liners steamed into Dublin Bay to ride at anchor as temporary hotels, the flag of the keys of the Kingdom of Heaven flying from their masts. A useful vantage point to watch a procession of dignitaries arrive from around the world, scarlet silk cape billowing in the sea breeze. Men who had left these shores in curates black now returned in episcopal crimson from what you might say were Ireland's dioceses around the world. A chain of diplomatic influence from America to Africa, from China to Australia and Fiji. An alternative diplomatic corps for the young Ireland and on which the sun never set either, counterbalancing the British Empire's influence. Their position in the church gave them stature abroad and the ear of governments, so they were heard above the loud, confident voice of imperialist Britain. If Britain had its temporal empire, little Ireland gained a moral, spiritual core through the international agency of these men of the church. And the crowds which a few years before had lined the streets to see the king step ashore on his other island now returned to welcome the princes of the church and to share the pride that our little island should enjoy such international recognition, with no fewer than 11 cardinals now following the king's footsteps at a remove of years. And it was the revolutionaries, now the politicians, who in battle had seen off the king, his heirs and retinue, who now rushed to go down on one knee and kiss the extended hand, the episcopal ring of the Pope's representatives. And in the Phoenix Park, before a massive throng of loyal Catholics, each with a vote, of course, Taoiseach Eamon de Valera defined Irishness for the papal legate. We were a people ever firm in our allegiance to our ancestral faith. Since St. Patrick, Ireland had been a Christian, a Catholic nation. All the ruthless attempts through the centuries to force her from this allegiance had not shaken her faith. She remained a Catholic nation. In the Phoenix Park, 1 million people cheered, tears of joy streaming down many a weather-beaten face. They sang of faith of our fathers, and nobody asked which fathers. And as the throng was bathed in the golden voice of the papal Count John McCormack and Panis Angelicus, the curtains of many a Protestant home were quietly drawn, and behind them many a family wondered if there was a place for them in this new Ireland. That outpouring of the fervour of a loyal mass was to a church still carving its physical response to an internal battle fought, lost and won some 50 years before. The less formalised Irish church, which would say Mass in people's homes, for instance, because there were fewer churches, lost out to central Roman power championed by Cardinal Paul Cullen. And with that, the church took on a Latin personality physically expressed in a surge of building, complete with Roman marble and ornate pillars, exquisite vestments and finery, which confirmed our loyalty to Rome. The Hiberno-Romanesque spires rose up all over the country to dominate the landscape. 600 new churches built in the 40 years up to the turn of the century. But writers were less enthused by the style of later years, complaining that, artistically, anything seemed good enough for God and his worshippers. They complained of brass vulgarities and gaudy lustre, artlessly and commercially turned out like boots or shoes. But the people took with devotional gusto to the other expressions of this new Latin church personality, with its scapulars and rosary beads, shrines, marble altars, gleaming monstrances at benediction and the 40 hours, processions, retreats, perpetual adoration, novenas, pilgrimages, and devotion to the Immaculate Conception and the Sacred Heart. Latin ritual which became an organic part of the weave of people's lives. On Sundays and holy days, those mass-going feet were heard crunching the gravel of country roads, shuffling on the cobbles of towns, and cracking the ice of winter puddles, to crowd into a church in every parish in the country, unlettered, unknowing, unquestioning. And in those proud churches of marble and gleaming brass picking up the flickering candles, a people who had trouble writing English intoned their prayers and pleadings in Latin. At the consecration, clouds of incense billowing upwards from a swinging, glistening thurible, the sweet smell of sainthood, of God's antechamber, in the air. Around us, the urgently whispered pleadings of the pious who enjoyed the sanctuary and the certainty the church offered. Refuge of the afflicted, to thee do we cry, poor banished children of Eve. Here they found sanctuary, hope. Your husband might be out of work, there might be no food or coal at home, but in your mind and soul, you are part of a higher scheme of things. On sunlit summer days, parents and children would parade behind a monstrance held aloft under a silken embroidered canopy as they celebrated Corpus Christi, the body of Christ. Several generations marching together, handing on the faith, the tradition. And as they knelt on the grass of the local shrine, around them would waft the hymn, Faith of our fathers, holy faith, we will be true to thee till death. They were drawn in huge numbers to confraternities, some achieving notoriety for the strength of feeling of their members, and to the Legion of Mary, which was born in Ireland and spread around the world in its devotion to Mary. They would brave the weather and darkness outside churches in makeshift sheds of canvas, selling their rosary and holy tracts, while their paraffin tilly lamps hissed at the serpent crushed beneath Mary's feet. It was a devotion which saw people walk to church in droves on autumn evenings, in a kind of national spiritual self-flagellation, when the missioner arrived in town, complete with the smell of brimstone and the terror of hell. From the pulpit he would shout of the wages of sin, and all would eagerly shout back their renunciation of the devil, his works and pomps. Piety may have been indistinguishable from compliance, but there was no denying the people's practice of their faith, and yet the bishops were disquieted. Pleasure-seeking and company-keeping were creeping into our society. Though the redoubtable Bishop of Galway, Dr. O'Doherty, had the answer and knew how to stamp that kind of foreign influence out. He exhorted the menfolk to take the lash to their daughters' backs. That was the good old system, and should be the system today, he urged them. The bishops felt themselves in combat with Rudolph Valentino in the cinema, with modern, they would say immodest fashion in magazines, with the lure of city life through radio, and worst of all, with the new dance halls being established around the countryside, which were leading to debasing pleasure and low sensuality. These vestibules of hell, as they were called, felt the full might of the clergy. In one Kerry parish, they drove their cars onto the dance floor to smash it. Musicians were branded as outcasts. The problem was not so much the dance itself, because the priests and more pious of the parishioners could police all that. The real danger was afterwards, as young people made their way home together. Where might that path lead? So the priests patrolled the country lanes at night, beating the bushes with their blackthorn sticks to drive out the canoodling young. But others saw this iron moral law as another evil, driving the young apart, robbing youth of love, of exuberance, of fun. And many who might have withstood the unemployment and poverty of the countryside felt themselves socially suffocating and left to breathe more freely in the cities or abroad.